They dragged me out of my own fishing cabin in handcuffs, while the so-called HOA cops shouted that I had no right to be on the lake anymore. Neighbors peeked through their blinds, whispering that I had finally lost the war against the HOA president. Karen? She stood there with her smug smile, arms folded like a queen who thought she owned the water, telling me that if I wanted access to the lake, I had to pay her fees, follow her rules, and bow to her authority. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't just a resident. I was the legal owner of the entire lake and every acre of shoreline surrounding it. That arrest was the biggest mistake she ever made, because it gave me the fire to expose her. Lies turned the whole neighborhood against her, and ultimately evict her from land she never even had a right to touch. The morning of my arrest started like any other at the lake. The mist was still rolling over the water. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, and the only sound was the slow drip of water falling from the wooden dock I had built with my own hands years ago. This lake wasn't just a property line on paper, it was my sanctuary, the place I came to fish, to think, and to feel peace away from the noise of the city. I inherited it from my grandfather, a man who had poured his sweat and soul into preserving this land for future generations. He had told me before he passed, "Never let anyone take this lake from you. It's not just water, it's our family's legacy." But as I was tightening a knot on my boat rope, I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. A pair of SUVs pulled up, one marked with flashing lights, but not from the sheriff's office. No, these cars had decals with the letters HOA Security Enforcement plastered on the side. Out of them stepped a group of men wearing fake-looking uniforms, clip-on badges gleaming in the morning sun. And right behind them, walking tall with that self-satisfied smirk, was Karen, the self-declared president of the Lakeside Homeowners Association. "Sir, you're trespassing on HOA property," one of the so-called officers barked as he approached me. He was maybe mid-40s, red-faced, out of shape, but carrying himself like he was some kind of war hero. I laughed, thinking it had to be a prank. Trespassing? On my own dock? Buddy, I own this lake, every square inch of it. Karen stepped forward, her blonde bob bouncing as she tilted her chin high. "Not anymore. By failing to join the HOA, you've forfeited your rights. This lake belongs to the association now, and you're in violation of community standards." I couldn't believe my ears. The audacity of this woman was unmatched. She moved into one of the houses that bordered my lake barely a year ago, and now she was talking like she had dominion over everything. She had been sending me letters for months, demands to join the HOA, to pay dues, to seek approval for any activity on the water, even my fishing. I'd laughed them off, tossed them in the fire pit, never once thinking she'd take it this far. But she had, and these fake cops weren't playing games. Two of them grabbed my arms, twisting them behind my back. Cold metal cuffs snapped shut around my wrists. "You can't be serious," I shouted, struggling against them. "I own the deed. I have the paperwork. You can't just—" Karen cut me off with a voice full of venomous delight. "You should have thought about that before ignoring HOA rules. You'll be facing heavy fines and possibly eviction. Maybe then you'll learn to follow authority." Eviction. On my own land. The absurdity of her words made my blood boil, but the cuffs were digging deep, and the fake cops started marching me toward their SUV. I could feel the eyes of my so-called neighbors peering from behind curtains and blinds, some with sympathy, others with that gossipy excitement of people who live for drama. And Karen, standing tall in the gravel driveway, waved as if she was already victorious. Inside the SUV, the stench of stale fast food wrappers mixed with sweat. The so-called officer riding shotgun kept eyeing me like I was some criminal. My mind raced. I knew I had all the legal rights. I had the original deed, records from the county, and even a notarized map showing the exact property boundaries. But Karen didn't care about law or truth. She cared about power. She wanted to be queen of this lake, and she thought humiliating me in front of the neighborhood was her coronation. They took me to the HOA clubhouse, not a courthouse, not a police station, but a glorified meeting hall. They shoved me inside, where a group of board members sat behind a long table, pretending it was a courtroom. Karen took the center seat, tapping her pen against a stack of papers. "This hearing will decide your fate," she announced like some dictator holding court. I sat there, still cuffed, rage simmering beneath the surface. But I didn't explode. Not yet. Because as much as I wanted to put Karen in her place, I knew one thing. The best revenge isn't loud. It's quiet, precise, and undeniable. And I had the ultimate weapon: ownership. But in that moment, as Karen called fake charges against me, and the so-called HOA cops puffed their chests, realized something chilling. She had already convinced half the neighborhood that she owned the lake. If I didn't act fast, her lies would become truth in their minds and I'd be fighting an uphill war. So I sat silently, studying her every move, memorizing every smug smirk, every time she twisted her words. I was already planning my counterattack. Because one thing my grandfather always told me echoed in my mind: don't fight on their battlefield, make them fight on yours. And Karen had no idea the battlefield was already mine. If you were in my shoes, handcuffed by fake HOA cops for trespassing on your own land, would you fight back immediately or wait silently to plan revenge? The so-called hearing in the HOA clubhouse was like something out of a bad reality TV show. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting shadows on the smug faces of Karen and her hand-picked board members. She sat at the center like a judge, her lips curled into that thin smile she always wore when she thought she was in control. To her left and right, her cronies, two retirees who always nodded at everything she said, and a younger couple who clearly just wanted to stay in her good graces, shuffled papers like they were preparing for trial. I was forced into a folding chair in the middle of the room, still cuffed, my wrists aching. The fake HOA cops stood behind me, arms crossed, their uniforms laughable, but their intimidation real enough for anyone who didn't know the law. Karen slammed her pen down on the table. "We are here to address the blatant disregard for community standards by this individual," she said, gesturing toward me as if I were some criminal dragged in off the street. "He has repeatedly ignored notices to join the Lakeside Homeowners Association, failed to pay mandatory dues, and continued to use the lake in violation of HOA regulations. Such behavior cannot be tolerated." Her words were sharp, rehearsed, dripping with venom. She pulled out a stack of envelopes, the letters she had sent me, and waved them dramatically. These were ignored, thrown away, disrespected, and now, because of his refusal, the HOA must act to protect the integrity of our community. I couldn't help but laugh, even with my wrists bound. "Your community? Karen, I don't live in your subdivision. My cabin is on my land and the lake belongs to me. I don't owe you a single dime." A murmur spread through the board members. Some looked uneasy, others curious. Karen's eyes flashed with annoyance, but she kept her composure. "Ownership is irrelevant when community standards are ignored. You may have paperwork, but this lake is shared by the residents who live here, and we vote on its use. That makes it ours." The arrogance, the sheer delusion. She was trying to rewrite reality with her words, to convince everyone that votes mattered more than deeds, that her imaginary authority outweighed the law. "Show me the law that says that," I shot back. Karen smirked. "The law of the HOA, which you are bound to follow by living adjacent to our community." I stared her down. "I'm not adjacent. You built your houses around my lake. I didn't move into your neighborhood. You moved into mine." The room grew tense. A few board members shifted uncomfortably, like they were realizing maybe they weren't on solid ground. Karen quickly waved her hand, trying to silence me. "This meeting is not about debate. It's about enforcement." She tapped her pen again, then looked directly at me. "As of today, the HOA board is imposing a fine of $10,000 for non-compliance. Failure to pay within 30 days will result in foreclosure proceedings against your property." The E. Words hit the room like a thunderclap. Some of the board members widened their eyes in shock. Even they weren't expecting her to go that far. The fake cops smirked behind me, clearly enjoying the show. Foreclosure. She was threatening to take my land, my cabin, my grandfather's legacy, all over her delusional claim of authority. But as angry as I was, I didn't show it. I leaned back in my chair, chains rattling, and smiled. Go ahead. Try. Karen blinked. For the first time, her confidence cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but I saw it. She expected me to beg, to panic, to grovel at her feet. Instead, I met her gaze with steady defiance. Because I knew something she didn't. I had all the legal documents stored in a fireproof safe at the cabin, along with copies filed at the county courthouse. My ownership wasn't up for debate. Her HOA had no jurisdiction, and once I unleashed that proof, her little empire would crumble. But timing was everything. If I showed my hand too soon, she'd rally her followers, twist her lies, and drag this into a drawn-out battle. No, I needed her to overreach, to push too far, to expose herself for the fraud she was. So when they finally released me later that afternoon, after hours of Karen's theatrics, I walked out of that clubhouse with my head high. My wrists were sore, my pride bruised, but my resolve stronger than ever. Back at the cabin, I opened the safe and pulled out the deed, the original maps, and my grandfather's signed documents. Holding them in my hands, I felt the weight of history and the responsibility. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about protecting what had been entrusted to me. Karen thought she had won. She thought parading me in fake handcuffs had humiliated me, broken me, forced me to bow. But all she had done was light the fuse on a powder keg. That night, as the moonlight shimmered on the lake's surface, I sat on the porch with the documents spread before me, planning my next move. I wasn't going to the HOA's battlefield. I wasn't going to argue in their clubhouse or beg at their meetings. No, I was going to bring this fight to the county courthouse, to the sheriff's department, to every legal authority that would shred her fantasy apart. But part of me wanted more than legal victory. I wanted Karen exposed. I wanted the neighborhood to see the truth, to realize they had been following a fraud who had no power over them. And I wanted her to feel the sting of eviction, not from a board seat, but from the very land she thought she ruled. The lake was mine. The cabin was mine, and soon the neighborhood would know the truth. If someone tried to strip you of land that had been in your family for generations, would you go straight to court immediately, or would you wait for the perfect moment to let them destroy themselves first? The morning after the sham trial, I woke up with sore wrists and a heavier burden on my chest. I walked out onto the porch, mug of steaming coffee in hand, and looked over the lake. The surface rippled gently in the breeze, catching streaks of golden sunrise. For a moment I almost forgot the chaos of the day before, but then I saw it. A fresh notice of violation taped to the dock post. Karen wasted no time. I yanked the paper off and read it. Unauthorized fishing. Unauthorized dock maintenance. Failure to obtain HOA approval. Daily fines accumulating. She had even written the word trespasser in bold red ink across the bottom. I crumpled it in my fist. The audacity of this woman was beyond reason. She thought if she flooded me with threats, I'd eventually cave. She didn't understand. Every letter she slapped onto my property was just another nail in her own coffin. That day, I drove into town. The county courthouse wasn't much, just a brick building with squeaky doors and tired clerks who had seen it all. I walked in with my folder full of documents and asked to see the property registrar. The clerk, a grey-haired woman with glasses, perched at the tip of her nose, looked through my paperwork carefully. "You're the sole owner of the lake and the surrounding acreage," she said after a few minutes. "Clear as day. This HOA has no legal authority over your land." I nodded. "That's what I thought, but they arrested me yesterday, hauled me out in handcuffs, threatened foreclosure." Her eyes widened. "Arrested? By who?" "HOA. "Cops," I said, bitterness dripping from my voice. The clerk leaned back in her chair and shook her head. "Honey, that's not just illegal, that's criminal. They impersonated law enforcement. You need to take this to the sheriff immediately." That was exactly what I planned to do. But when I pulled into my driveway later, I realized Karen wasn't going to wait for me to strike. She had escalated again. This time a giant HOA sign had been hammered into the ground at the entrance to my cabin's dirt road. "Private HOA property. Trespassers will be fined and removed." I could feel my blood pressure rise as I read it. She was staking her claim like some medieval warlord planting a flag on conquered land. Only problem for her was, it wasn't conquered, and it sure as hell wasn't hers. That night, I spread out all the documents on my kitchen table. The deed with my grandfather's signature, the notarized map of property boundaries clearly showing the lake fully within my ownership. Old tax records proving the land had never been annexed into the subdivision. Piece by piece I built my arsenal, but I knew paperwork alone wouldn't be enough. Karen was crafty. She thrived on spectacle, on manipulating neighbors, on making noise until people believed her version of the story. I needed to fight her not only with law but with exposure. So I started documenting everything. Every fake notice she posted, every HOA fine she threatened, every photo of her signs trespassing onto my road. I even mounted a trail camera near the dock to catch her cronies in the act. If she wanted a war, I was going to build a mountain of evidence that would bury her. Days turned into a tense waiting game. Each morning I'd find a new violation notice or some petty harassment. Once she even had one of her so-called officers tow my fishing boat out of the water and leave it chained at the clubhouse. Another time, she paraded down my driveway with a clipboard, taking pictures of my cabin like she was appraising it for foreclosure. But I didn't rise to the bait. I stayed calm, collected, because I knew every move she made was tightening the noose around her own neck. Finally, I paid a visit to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Dalton was a tall, no-nonsense man who had known my grandfather. When I laid the paperwork and evidence out on his desk, he whistled low. "Son, this isn't just harassment. This is fraud, impersonation, and unlawful detainment. Karen's playing with fire." I leaned forward. "Then let her burn. I want to file charges." Dalton nodded slowly. "I'll need to look deeper into this, but you've got a solid case. In the meantime, don't engage with her directly. Document everything. If she pushes harder, call me." That was good advice, but easier said than done, because Karen wasn't slowing down. In fact, her next move nearly pushed me over the edge. One evening, I returned from town to find a group of neighbors standing on the shoreline near my dock. Karen was there too, clipboard in hand, announcing loudly that the HOA had reclaimed the lake for community use. Kids were splashing in the shallows, adults were setting up lawn chairs, and my once peaceful retreat looked like a public pool. When I confronted her, she raised her voice so everyone could hear. "You can't stop us. The community has voted, and this lake belongs to the HOA now." I wanted to scream. I wanted to drag them all out of the water, but instead I pulled out my phone and recorded the entire scene. Karen standing there, declaring ownership of something she didn't own. Neighbors trespassing on my property. Proof, undeniable, irrefutable proof. That night, I uploaded every photo, every video, every scanned document into a secure drive. If Karen thought she could bully me into submission, she was about to learn that I wasn't fighting alone. I had the law, the sheriff, and soon enough the court of public opinion. Because once I set my plan in motion, there would be no going back. And when the smoke cleared, Karen wouldn't just lose her fake power, she'd lose her home, her reputation, and her grip on the community she had poisoned. The war was coming to a head, and I was ready. If your neighbor kept trespassing, towing your property, and even held fake trials against you, would you confront them head-on, or keep collecting evidence until the law crushed them for good? The next few days were tense, like the air before a thunderstorm. Karen's arrogance grew bolder with each passing hour, but something was changing. The neighbors who once peeked from behind curtains were now stepping out onto porches, whispering to each other. They had seen me dragged away in cuffs. They had seen Karen plant her signs and parade around with her fake cops, and some of them were starting to wonder, was she really as powerful as she claimed? Sheriff Dalton paid me a visit early one morning. He pulled up in his dusty patrol truck, boots crunching on my gravel driveway. I led him inside, where the evidence I'd gathered was stacked high on the kitchen table. Dalton flipped through photos, videos, and notices, his brow furrowed deeper with every page. "She's gone too far," he said finally. "Impersonating. Law enforcement alone is a felony, And this business of threatening foreclosure on land she doesn't own, that's fraud. I'll open an official investigation." Hearing those words felt like a weight lifting off my chest, but I also knew Karen wouldn't fold easily. She thrived on spectacle, on keeping her followers under her spell. If she sensed the walls closing, then she'd lash out harder than ever. And sure enough, she did. That same afternoon, I heard engines revving near the dock. I stepped outside to see two of Karen's HOA officers towing away my boat, again. Only this time, they weren't sneaky about it. They did it in broad daylight in front of half the neighborhood. Karen stood nearby with her clipboard, announcing to anyone who would listen that my boat was illegally parked on community waters. I pulled out my phone, filming the whole scene. "Smile for the camera," I called out. "This is evidence of theft." Karen whipped around, her smile faltering for just a moment, but she recovered quickly, raising her voice. "This man refuses to follow rules. The HOA is protecting our community from dangerous and selfish behavior." Dangerous. Selfish. She was painting me as some kind of villain. But this time, not everyone was buying it. A few neighbors crossed their arms, frowning. One older man muttered loud enough for me to hear, "Pretty sure that lake doesn't belong to her." That was my opening. Over the next few days, I started reaching out quietly to neighbors. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with facts. I invited a few over to my porch, laid out the deed, the maps, the notarized documents. I showed them proof that the lake was mine, that Karen's HOA had no claim. Some were shocked, others embarrassed that they had believed her lies. "I thought she was just strict," one woman admitted, shaking her head. "I didn't know she was making it all up." Word began to spread. Karen still barked orders and slapped violation notices everywhere, but whispers traveled faster than her threats. People were questioning her, resisting her control. Meanwhile, Dalton's investigation was heating up. He called me into his office one morning, a grim smile on his face. "We've confirmed the HOA has no jurisdiction over your property. And those security guys, they're not licensed officers of anything, just neighbors she paid under the table." He leaned forward. "I'm building a case, but I'll need a little more. If she makes one wrong move, one more impersonation, one more unlawful act, I can bring charges." I nodded. "Trust me, Sheriff, she won't stop. She can't help herself." And I was right. That evening I returned home to find a bright red sticker slapped across my cabin door. "Property condemned. HOA order of eviction." I tore it down, fury burning in my chest. She had crossed the final line. It wasn't just harassment anymore. It was a full-blown attempt to erase me from my own land. But here's the thing about people like Karen. They never realize when they've gone too far. Every extreme stunt she pulled was another crack in her crown, another reason for neighbors to turn against her, another piece of ammunition for my case. So instead of raging, I smiled. I took photos of the sticker, filed it away with the rest of my evidence, and started preparing for the moment she wouldn't see coming, because I wasn't just going to prove her wrong. I wasn't just going to clear my name. I was going to turn her little kingdom upside down and make sure she was the one who got evicted. The lake shimmered that night, calm and quiet, as if it knew what was coming. Karen thought she had power. She thought fear would keep people in line, but fear only lasts so long, and the truth lasts forever. The neighborhood felt different now. You could feel it in the air, a mix of tension, doubt, and quiet rebellion. Karen was still strutting around like a self-appointed queen, clipboard in hand, barking orders, but fewer people obeyed. Some neighbors avoided eye contact when she passed, others whispered behind her back. A couple even stopped by my porch at night to thank me for standing up to her, though they weren't brave enough to do it openly yet. Karen noticed the shift, too, and it drove her mad. Her smile grew tighter, her speeches louder, her punishments harsher. She plastered fresh violation notices on nearly every house, accusing families of breaking rules that didn't even exist. She fined people for leaving garden hoses out, for parking too close to the curb, for having the wrong kind of lawn chairs on their porches. But her biggest obsession was still me. One gray morning, I woke to the sound of heavy machinery rumbling near the dock. My stomach tightened. I sprinted outside and froze. There, parked right on the shore, was a rented excavator. Two of her so-called officers were standing by, and in the seat of the machine, grinning like she was about to crown herself empress, was Karen. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. Karen raised her voice so everyone in earshot could hear. "This dock is an unauthorized structure built without HOA approval. It is hereby ordered for demolition." The excavator's claw lowered, groaning as it swung toward the dock I had built with my grandfather. Memories rushed through me. Summer mornings fishing with him, long evenings watching the sunset together, his calloused hands guiding mine as I hammered the first nails into the wood. That dock wasn't just planks and nails. It was history. It was family. I pulled out my phone, recording every second. "Touch that dock and you'll regret it, Karen. You don't own this lake." She smirked. "The HOA owns everything within community borders. That means this dock belongs to us." The claw descended. Boards cracked, splinters flew. My stomach twisted as I watched her tear apart the very thing my grandfather had left me. Neighbors gathered at the shoreline, some gasping, some whispering in shock. A few even recorded their own videos. That was the moment Karen lost the crowd. One woman shouted, "That's not your dock, Karen." Another man muttered, "She's gone insane." People began filming, their phones raised high. Karen tried to ignore them, but her smirk faltered as the murmurs grew louder. By the time she destroyed half the dock, Sheriff Dalton's patrol truck roared up the road. He stepped out, hands on his belt, eyes burning. "Karen, shut that machine. Down right now." The excavator sputtered to a stop. Karen climbed down, still clutching her clipboard like it was a crown jewel. "Sheriff, I'm enforcing HOA regulations. This man refuses to comply." Dalton cut her off with a raised hand. "You've crossed the line. You impersonated law enforcement, threatened foreclosure, trespassed, and now you've destroyed private property. I've seen enough." Turned to me. "Do you want to press charges?" I didn't even hesitate. "Yes." The crowd gasped as Dalton pulled out his handcuffs. The real kind, not the cheap knockoffs Karen's officers wore. He snapped them onto her wrists as her mouth fell open in shock. "You can't do this to me. I run this community," she shrieked, thrashing against the cuffs. Dalton's voice was calm but firm. "No, ma'am. You've been running a scam, and now you're going to answer for it." The so-called officers backed away, their faces pale. Without Karen barking orders, they looked like lost dogs. Some neighbors even booed as Dalton led her toward the truck. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. But I knew this wasn't over. Arrest was just the beginning. Karen still had influence, still had followers who might rally behind her. If I wanted this nightmare to end for good, I had to finish what I started. That night I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the documents and videos I'd gathered. I drafted formal eviction notices, not for myself but for Karen. You see, her house wasn't built on HOA land like she always claimed. The survey maps proved it. A corner of her property actually extended into the lakefront acreage I owned. She had been trespassing since the day she moved in. With the sheriff's backing and the law on my side, I had the power to do exactly what she had tried to do to me: remove her. Only this time it wouldn't be fake notices or imaginary authority. It would be real, legal, and final. Karen thought destroying my dock would break me. Instead, it gave me the perfect stage. The neighborhood had seen her madness firsthand. The sheriff had seen her crimes up close. Now, when I evicted her, nobody would dare stand in her defense. The queen of the HOA had written her own downfall, and I was ready to sign the final decree. The morning after Karen's arrest, the lake felt different. For the first time in months, the air wasn't heavy with tension. The water glistened under the sun like it was celebrating, and the usual whispers from neighbors carried a new tone. Relief, curiosity, even hope. But I knew better than to think it was over. People like Karen didn't go down quietly. They clawed, they schemed. They tried to twist the narrative until the last breath of control slipped through their fingers. Sure enough, by evening, rumors spread that Karen had posted bail. A few of her loyalists still clung to her story, insisting the sheriff had overstepped. that she was the real victim. But the majority had seen too much. Videos of her tearing apart my dock and screaming at Dalton in handcuffs were circulating through the neighborhood. The illusion of her authority was shattered. Still, I wasn't content with her just facing charges. I wanted her gone completely. That night, I laid out the final weapon, the eviction order. It wasn't some fake notice scribbled in red ink. It was a legal document, signed and stamped, backed by the county's survey maps. Karen's house, the very place she had ruled from like a castle, was partly sitting on my land. She wasn't just overreaching. She was trespassing. When I handed the papers to Sheriff Dalton the next morning, he read them carefully, then let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. Looks like the Queen's been squatting on your land all along." He looked me in the eye. "You sure you want to go through with this? Once I serve her, there's no turning back." I didn't hesitate. Serve her. The next day, the entire neighborhood gathered like it was some kind of festival. Word had spread fast. The sheriff was marching to Karen's door. I stood at the edge of the crowd, documents in hand, my heart pounding. Dalton approached her house, knocked firmly, and waited. The door creaked open. Karen appeared, still in her perfect blazer, hair done, but her eyes were wild, frantic. She scanned the crowd, searching for allies, but found only folded arms and judging stares. "Karen Whitfield," Dalton said loudly so everyone could hear, "you are hereby served with an official eviction notice. Your property line extends onto land that does not belong to you. As of today, you have 30 days to vacate the premises." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face went red, then pale. She snatched the papers, scanning them furiously. "This is a mistake. This is fraud. He's lying." Dalton shook his head. "County records don't lie. The land belongs to him. Always has." Karen's voice cracked as she turned to the neighbors. "Don't just stand there. This is your community. You need me." But no one moved. No one spoke. The spell was broken. The people who once feared her, who once believed her lies, now saw her for what she was, a fraud, a bully, a tyrant brought to her knees. I stepped forward, my voice steady. "Karen, you tried to strip me of my home. You dragged me away in fake handcuffs. You destroyed my grandfather's dock. You lied to everyone here. And now the truth is out. You don't own this lake. You never did. And soon you won't own that house either." For the first time, Karen had no words. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again, but no sound came out. She looked smaller somehow, deflated, as if the weight of her crumbling empire was pressing down on her shoulders. Dalton placed a hand on her arm. 30 days. Don't make me come back sooner." The crowd began to disperse, murmurs filling the air. Some people smiled at me. Others clapped me on the back. A few even apologized for believing Karen's lies. Over the next weeks, Karen's reign collapsed piece by piece. Without her, the HOA board dissolved. The fake cops disappeared. The endless stream of violation notices stopped. The neighborhood breathed again. And every day as the deadline approached, I watched her house grow emptier. Furniture carried out, curtains pulled down. Finally, one gray morning, a moving truck rolled away, leaving the house dark and silent. I walked down to the lake that evening. The dock still broken, but the water calm and free. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I thought of my grandfather, of his words about protecting the legacy, and I felt a peace I hadn't felt in months. Karen was gone. The lake was mine again. The neighbors were free from her tyranny. Justice had been served. But most importantly, I had learned something powerful. Bullies only win when people stay silent. When you stand your ground, when you shine light on their lies, they crumble. And as I cast my fishing line into the water, the ripples spreading across the lake, I knew one thing for sure. This lake would never bow to a queen again. Section 6. Question for the audience. If you finally had the power to evict someone who had tormented your entire neighborhood, would you show mercy? Or would you make sure they were gone for good, no matter the cost?